Close your eyes for 2 seconds. Picture a street where the rich ride past in carriages while workers live in tiny rooms and children run errands by the factories. Now think, what if someone told you that you could change where you were born into where you might go in life? That's what the French Revolution started. A tiny idea that became a giant question: who should control society? Today, we'll meet the people and ideas that tried to answer that question. Let's begin. After the French Revolution, the idea that society could be remade spread like wildfire. People started asking, why must privilege be inherited? In many countries, the old order, nobles, and clergy had great power. Suddenly, ordinary people and thinkers debated rights, citizenship, and who should rule. Even thinkers in India like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Desrosiers read about these changes and discussed them. Let's imagine the three big political voices as characters. Conservatives. They feared sudden change. Think of them like the person who says, "Don't throw away our old library, we will change slowly." They respected traditions and wanted gradual reforms. Liberals. They wanted laws, parliaments, and protection of individual rights, but they were cautious about mass voting. They believed property owners should lead, so liberals said change, but with order. Radicals, they wanted power for the majority, often supported workers' and women's suffrage. They objected to concentrated wealth. For example, in Britain, liberals argued for parliamentary laws. Radicals pushed for suffrage and sometimes direct action. In Italy, Mazzini combined nationalism with demands for equality. Industrialization reshaped everything. New machines, railways, and factories pulled millions into towns. Imagine farmers who had never worked with machines now learning to operate noisy, dangerous looms. Workdays got long. In small workshops, sometimes 15 hours. In big factories, around 10 to 12 hours. Women earned less than men, sometimes half. Children worked too. Problems that followed: overcrowded towns and poor sanitation, unemployment during downturns, low wages, and frequent strikes. Many liberals and radicals were themselves factory owners or businessmen who believed that if workers were healthy and educated, the economy would grow. So they argued for reforms, schools, public health, and laws protecting labor. But other thinkers said reforms weren't enough, the system itself might be the problem. Say aloud with me: shorter hours, better pay, safer work. Repeat twice. When people saw huge inequality, some began to ask, is private property the problem? Socialism offered a new answer. If society owned the means of production, factories, land, banks, then profits would benefit everyone, not a few. But this wasn't one single idea. Think of socialism as a family with different members. Cooperative socialists like Robert Owen tried to create communities where people shared work and profits. New harmony. Imagine a small village where the bakery, the workshop, and the school are run together. State socialists like Louis Blanc wanted governments to encourage and create cooperatives. Radical critics like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels gave a structural critique. Capitalism created a class, the capitalist, who made profit from workers. Marx said workers would ultimately overthrow capitalists and set up social ownership, a communist society. Socialists believed concentration of property caused exploitation. Remedies ranged from cooperatives to full social ownership. Example: Owen's New Harmony lasted years but faced problems. Marx's theory influenced workers in cities who felt exploited every day. Socialist ideas moved from pamphlets to streets. Workers created associations, funds for unemployed members, and unions. The Second International helped coordinate activity across borders. By the late 19th century, there were socialist parties: Germany's SPD, France's Socialist Party, and by 1905 a Labour Party in Britain. Important point. Even where socialists didn't win governments, they influenced laws. They pushed for limits on working hours, better wages, and social insurance. Their success in parliament also showed a new thing. Working class power could be political, not only via strikes. Second, international trade unions and parliamentary action were ways socialism spread. Quick, name one right workers fought for. Yes, the 8-hour day was a major demand. All of these ideas, liberal reforms, radical demands, socialist plans, collided in one dramatic place, Russia. It was a largely agricultural empire with pockets of factories, and by 1917 it would explode into revolution. Memory check. Repeat with me. French Revolution opened the idea of remaking society. Industrialization created urgent social problems. Socialism proposed collective control of property as a solution. If you remembered these three, you are already halfway to understanding why the 20th century looked the way it did. So, these were the ideas of change spreading across Europe: freedom, equality, socialism. But the biggest stage where these ideas turned into a real revolution was Russia. Let's travel there and see how one empire ruled by a czar collapsed under the weight of a war, hunger, and new dreams of equality. In 1914, Tsar Nicholas II ruled a massive empire. It stretched from Europe to the Pacific, covering Finland, Poland, Ukraine, Central Asia, and more. The state religion was Russian Orthodox Christianity, but the empire was home to Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and Buddhists too. Most people, nearly 85% of the population, were peasants. This was much higher than in France or Germany, where only about half were agricultural. Peasants in Russia were deeply religious, but unlike in France, during the earlier revolution, they did not respect the nobility. They often refused to pay rent, and in 1902, many even attacked landlords. Industry existed only in pockets in cities like St. Petersburg and Moscow. Here, workers lived in crowded conditions, often working 10 to 15 hours a day. Women made up about one-third of the workforce but earned far less than men. Strikes were common, especially in textiles and metal industries. Russia was mostly agrarian, but unrest was growing in both countryside and factories. All political parties were illegal before 1914, yet socialist groups secretly formed. The Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, inspired by Marx, was created in 1898, but they argued among themselves. Some believed peasants could be the main revolutionary force because of their tradition of pooling land in communes called mir. Others, especially Lenin, argued peasants were too divided, poor versus rich, and only industrial workers could lead a socialist revolution. This split created two factions: Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, who wanted a disciplined party of committed revolutionaries; Mensheviks, who wanted a broader, more open party like Germany's SPD. Lenin's Bolsheviks believed only a tightly organized party could overthrow Tsarist rule. Life in Russia grew harder. Prices rose in 1904, wages fell, and unrest spread. In January 1905, 110,000 workers marched to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, led by Father Gapon. They carried religious icons and petitions asking for shorter hours, better wages, and a constitution. Instead of listening, the Tsar's troops opened fire. Over 100 people were killed, 300 wounded. This day became known as Bloody Sunday. The massacre shocked the country. Strikes spread, universities closed, lawyers and doctors formed unions, peasants attacked landlords. Under pressure, Tsar Nicholas allowed the creation of a parliament, the Duma, but he quickly dismissed it whenever it challenged him. By changing voting laws, he filled later Dumas with conservatives only. Bloody Sunday turned ordinary Russians against the Tsar and showed how fragile his rule was. In 1914, Russia entered World War I alongside Britain and France. At first, people supported the war, but defeats followed. Russian armies lost badly to Germany and Austria. Over 7 million soldiers died or were wounded by 1917. The war wrecked the economy. Railways collapsed, factories closed due to shortage, and grain was sent to the army, leaving cities starving. By winter 1916, bread riots became common. Refugees crowded towns, soldiers deserted the front. The Tsar refused to share power with the Duma and relied on poor advisors, including the infamous monk Rasputin. World War I made conditions unbearable and destroyed faith in the Tsarist government. By February 1917, Petrograd, the capital, was boiling. Workers lived on the right bank of the Neva River, while the Tsar's palace and government buildings stood on the left. On 22nd February, a factory lockout triggered strikes. Over the next days, women led demonstrations demanding bread and better conditions. Soldiers were ordered to fire on protesters, but many mutinied and joined them instead. On 27th February, workers and soldiers formed the Petrograd Soviet, a council to represent ordinary people. The Tsar was advised to abdicate, and on 2nd March 1917 he gave up the throne. February 1917 ended the monarchy. Russia became a republic with a provisional government. The provisional government tried to run the country, but it kept Russia in the war and failed to solve land shortages. Meanwhile, Soviets were forming everywhere. In April, Lenin returned from exile. He issued his famous April thesis: end the war immediately, land to peasants, banks nationalized. At first, even Bolsheviks thought Lenin was too radical, but as conditions worsened, his slogans, peace, land, and bread, grew popular. By autumn 1917, the provisional government was weak. While Bolsheviks gained support, Lenin pushed for action. On 24th October, Bolshevik Red Guards seized government offices. The cruiser Aurora fired a blank shot to signal the assault on the Winter Palace. By night, ministers had surrendered. This was the October Revolution. Russia's first socialist government was born under Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks quickly nationalized banks and industries. Land was declared social property. Nobles lost estates and large houses were divided among families. Titles of nobility were banned. The Bolsheviks renamed themselves the Communist Party. Though they lost elections to a constituent assembly, Lenin dissolved it, claiming Soviets were too democratic. Soon Russia became a one-party state. Trade unions were brought under party control. Secret police, the Cheka, crushed opposition. Writers and artists at first supported socialism, but many grew disillusioned as censorship increased. Not everyone accepted Bolshevik rule. From 1918 to 1920, civil war raged between the Reds, Bolsheviks, the Whites, Royalists, and the Greens, Socialist revolutionaries. Foreign powers like Britain, France, and Japan also intervened. Despite chaos, the Bolsheviks won by 1920. In 1922, they formed the USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It gave autonomy to many nationalities, but also enforced strict policies. Civil war ended with the creation of the USSR in 1922. After Lenin's death, Stalin took control. He introduced centralized planning with ambitious 5-year plans. Heavy industries like coal, steel, and oil grew rapidly. Schools expanded, public health improved, and crèches were set up for workers' children. But Stalin also forced collectivization of agriculture. Peasants were made to work on large collective farms called kolkhoz. Many resisted, killing their livestock. The result? famines, especially between 1930 to 33, where millions died. Critics of Stalin were imprisoned, exiled, or executed during political pauses. While the USSR became an industrial giant, it came at the cost of the freedom and immense suffering. Stalin modernized the USSR but through fear, famine, and repression. Despite its harsh realities, the Russian Revolution inspired workers and colonized nations worldwide. Communist parties were formed in many countries. The Bolsheviks set up the Comintern to support revolutions abroad. By mid 20th century, the USSR had become a superpower, proving that a backward empire could industrialize rapidly. But by the 1950s, people also realized it had betrayed many ideals of freedom. By the end of the 20th century, the USSR collapsed, but socialist ideas continue to inspire movements across the world. The Russian Revolution gave socialism global recognition, even though the Soviet model failed later. So, that's the journey from the storm of ideas after the French Revolution to the smoke of factories in industrial Europe to the flames of revolution in Russia. We saw how liberals, radicals, and socialists debated change, how workers and peasants suffered and demanded rights, and how the Russian Revolution became a turning point in the world history. Remember these three takeaways. Ideas of freedom and equality spread from France to the world. Industrialization created both progress and misery, pushing people to fight for change. Socialism and the Russian Revolution showed that societies could be reorganized, but also warned us about the dangers of dictatorship. This one chapter connects Europe, India, and the world, reminding us that ideas have power and revolutions can shape centuries. Subscribe this channel for next chapter and let me know your suggestions in the comments. You can watch Hindi explanation of the chapter as well.